Hey friends, my apologies. I accidentally turned off the beginning of essay number 142, Christopher Columbus. I accidentally cut that off as I was reaching for the engraving here. But I just wanted to give you all a really nice look at the next engraving. We're going to continue reading about Christopher Columbus. You know, this is going to be a long essay. We might as well break it up a little bit. It is in our big lovely book called American Miscellany. The engraving is called Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus, before the Council of Salamanca. And yeah, you can see Christopher Columbus there pointing at the globe, hopefully. And so we're in the middle of essay 142. And we were just getting to a description of the engraving. So let's go ahead and pick up where we left off in our last reading. All right, let's pick up on page 345. They actually mention this engraving that we were looking at here. Let's see. Okay. The engraving on page 347 represents Columbus at the moment when the force of his argument has arrested the attention of the judges. When one hand rests upon the Bible, the index finger of the other is directing their attention to that point on the globe where the undiscovered continent is supposed to lie. The argument, the proof, the refutation are strikingly exhibited. His figure is erect, his eye enkindled, and his whole expression animated. Around him are seen the judges, with pity, doubt, incredulity, and conviction variously depicted in their countenances. The eloquence, truth, and The eloquence, truth, and devout enthusiasm of Columbus convinced many of his judges, but the majority remained incredulous. Conferences were multiplied without result, and a final decision was procrastinated till the turn of summer, 1487. Again called the court to begin the campaign against the Moors. During its continuance, there was no time to listen to his suit, though Columbus followed the court and took an active part in the war, receiving occasional supplies of money. These delays do not appear to have exhausted his hopes or patience, as in the spring of 1488 he declined an invitation from King John to return to the court of Portugal, in which he was assured of protection from all civil or criminal suits pending against him. Perhaps disgust at the conduct of the king had some influence on this refusal, and his brother Bartholomew was now in England, endeavoring to prevail on Henry VII to engage in this project of discovery. From this monarch, he says that he received a favorable letter, though at what time does not appear. In 1489, Columbus was commanded to attend the court in order to have a conference with the king, but the Moorish War and other matters prevented him from attaining an audience till the winter of 1491. The court was then preparing for the campaign in which Granada, the last refuge of the Moors, fell, and the council had given in its report that his scheme was vain and impossible. The most learned portion of its members were, however, in his favor, and hence probably the undecided nature of the royal answer, that the care and expense of the war prevented them engaging in any new enterprise, but on its conclusion they would treat with him about his proposal. Bitterly disappointed with this cold and evasive answer, Columbus turned his back on the court where he had wasted so many precious years. but bound to Spain by attachment to a lady of Cordova, he was unwilling to leave the country without another attempt. He applied to the Dukes of Medina, Sidonia, and Medinaceli, both possessing vast estates in the maritime provinces of Spain, which gave them the power and revenues rather than the princes of the subjects. The former, however, rejected his proposal as the dream of an Italian visionary, and the latter, though so much disposed to engage in it that he had actually 3 vessels ready to sail, at length, dreading the displeasure of the king, dismissed Columbus, advising him again to apply at the court, as the undertaking was too great for a subject, and fit only for a sovereign power. Thus, baffled anew in his hopes, Columbus resolved to proceed to France, but first returned to the convent where he had 7 years before left his son. Here he meant to leave his second son, whom the lady mentioned above had borne him, and whom, though illegitimate, he always treated with the same favor as his elder brother. The worthy friar, Juan Perez, was greatly moved by the disappointment of his friend, still more so when he heard his determination to quit Spain and carry his important project to another land. He again consulted his friend the physician, calling in also Martin Alonso Pinzon, the head of a distinguished and wealthy family of merchants in the neighboring town. Pinzon not only approved of the plan of Columbus, but offered to bear the expense of a renewed application to the court. Sorry, there's a lot of little spots on these pages. Okay, so he's got the expense of the renewed application. The friar, who had formerly been confessor to the queen, undertook to write her on the subject, and having persuaded Columbus to wait an answer, dispatched a letter by a trusty messenger. In 14 days he brought back an answer, thanking the friar for his timely services and requesting Columbus to return to court. On receiving this epistle, Perez mounted his mule and set out secretly for the court, passing through the newly conquered territory of the Moors. He found the queen busy with the siege of Granada, but being admitted to an audience, pleaded the case of Columbus with so much earnestness that Isabella again requested him to be sent to her, and ordered him a sum of money to pay his expenses. This favorable result was undoubtedly aided with the recommendation of the Duke of Medinaceli. On being informed of this returning favor, Columbus again set out for court, and arrived there in time to witness the surrender of Granada, the mournful departure of the Moors, and the triumphal entry of the Spaniards into the magnificent hills of the Alhambra. Amid the rejoicing multitudes he walked melancholy and dejected, perhaps contrasting with secret contempt the conquest which swelled every bosom with rapture, with that nobler and bloodless victory which he felt destined to achieve over the unbounded ocean, and musing on the vast realms he was to subjugate to the cross. Also, the monarchs were faithful in their promise. Persons of confidence were appointed to negotiate with him, but an unexpected difficulty arose. Columbus demanded princely stipulations for himself, worthy of the vast empire he had to bestow. He was to be invested with the title and privileges of admiral and viceroy over the countries he should discover, and receive a tenth of the gains either by trade or conquest. These terms were at once rejected as degrading to the dignity of the crown, but Columbus would accept of nothing less, and again removing his mule, took his departure for Cordova, February 1492, resolved to proceed immediately to France. In this emergency, Louis de Saint-Angel receiver of the revenues in Aragon, determined to make one bold effort to prevent this irreparable loss and dishonor to the nation. He obtained an audience of the queen, pointed out to her how small the risk compared to the probable gain, how much this enterprise might advance the glory of God, exalt the church, and extend her own empire, and what cause of regret it would furnish to her friends, of triumph to her enemies, should it be accomplished by some other power. He urged these and other arguments till Isabella declared her resolution to undertake the enterprise, but Ferdinand looked coldly on the affair and represented the exhausted condition of the treasury. But the queen's enthusiasm was now roused, and she exclaimed, "I undertake this enterprise for my own crown of Castile, and will pledge my jewels to raise the necessary funds." Sant'Angelo offered to advance the money, but this was not required, and the funds really came from the revenue of Aragon, Ferdinand's own kingdom. A messenger on horseback was sent after Columbus, who overtook him 2 leagues from the city, and with some difficulty persuaded him to return. Columbus was now received with great kindness, and in an audience with the queen interested her deeply in his success by expatiating on the opportunities it offered for extending the Christian faith. Ferdinand continued cold as usual and smiled at the pious suggestion of Columbus that the treasures won from his discoveries should be consecrated to recover the Holy Sepulchre from the power of the infidels. The terms finally agreed to were that Columbus and his heirs should enjoy the office of admiral and governor in all the countries he discovered, and be entitled to 1/10 of all the gold, silver, precious stones, and other merchandise gained within his admiralty, or on contributing 1/8 of the cost to 1/8 of the profits. This agreement was signed on the 17th of April, 1492, at Santa Fe near Granada, and on the 30th of that month an order was issued to the town of Palos to have two caravels ready for sea in 10 days, to be placed under the command of Columbus. His son was in the meantime appointed page to the young prince. Thus, at last successful, after many weary years of poverty, neglect, and bitter ridicule, Columbus returned to Palos in his 56th year, to prepare for his great enterprise. But his difficulties were not yet at an end. When the royal order was read at Palos, universal terror prevailed, and the boldest mariners refused to take part in an expedition devoted, as they believed, to certain destruction. The royal mandate, the persuasions of Columbus, the influence of the prior were alike disregarded. On the 20th of June, a new order was issued, empowering the magistrates to press into this service any vessels or crews they might think proper, but this expedient was no less fruitless. At last, Pinzon, already mentioned as a supporter of Columbus, came forward, and with his brother not only furnished one vessel, but offered to accompany the expedition. Their example and influence encouraged others, so that the 3 small vessels were ready for sea within a month. Only one of them was fully decked, the others were open in the center, but built high at the prow and stern, with cabins for the accommodation of the crew. Seriously? Like they had 2 half-finished ships just go out. Alright. Columbus commanded the largest vessel. Martin Pinzon II, with one of his brothers as pilot, and a third brother had command of the 3rd vessel. The whole company consisted of 120 persons, of whom 90 were sailors. Before setting sail, Columbus confessed himself to the friar Juan Perez and partook the communion, in which he was joined by most of his associates. On Friday, the 3rd of August, 1492, half an hour before sunrise, Columbus sailed from the Bar of Saltes, a small island opposite the town of Huelva, on this memorable expedition. He directed his course first for the Canaries, where he arrived on the 9th, and was detained for 3 weeks, repairing one of his vessels. Repairing one of his half-finished vessels, which was already injured, probably by its owners. Awesome. When sailing past Tenerife, an eruption of its volcanic peaks terrified his crew, ready to interpret every event into a portent of disaster. Columbus reassured them by pointing out its natural cause, being more concerned by a report he heard at Gomera, where he had stopped to take in provisions, that 3 Portuguese caravels were cruising about with an intent to capture him. On the 6th of September he left this island, but was delayed by calms, so that it was the 9th of that month before they lost sight of Faro, the furthest west of these islands. Then it is said that the hearts of many of the crew failed them. They burst into tears and loud lamentations at thus taking leave, as forever, of home, family, and friends, and plunging headlong into the unknown dangers of the trackless ocean. Columbus encouraged them by pictures of wealth and splendor of the regions they were about to visit, and promises of rich rewards. He also issued orders to the commanders of other vessels, in case of separation, to sail due westward for 700 leagues, when, as land might then be expected, they were to sail only during the day. He also, to deceive his crew, kept two reckonings of his ship's course, one correct for his own use, and the other in which a number of leagues were daily subtracted from the sailing of the ship, open to the inspection of all. That guy, okay. On the 11th of September, the sight of a broken mast anew excited the terror of his sailors. 2 days after, he, for the first time, observed the variation of the compass, which no longer pointed to the pole star, but gradually varied more and more to the west. He could not conceal this phenomenon from the pilots, who, not without reason, feared that the compass was about to lose its virtue, and to leave them without a guide in this pathless ocean. Columbus, for whose skill as an astronomer they had great respect, quieted their minds by telling them that the compass remained unchanged, its apparent motion being caused by the revolution of the North Star round the true pole, an explanation not satisfactory to his own mind. The ships were now in the region of the trade winds, which, blowing steadily from the east, so that for many days they did not require to shift a sail, wafted them rapidly on their way. Landbirds occasionally appeared. Wafted them. Shouldn't that be? Wafted them rapidly on their way. Landbirds occasionally appeared, cheering the sailors with the hope that their voyage was near its end. The soft, balmy air is compared to the pure mornings in April in Andalusia, wanting only the song of the nightingale to complete the illusion. Soon after they reached the large patches of floating seaweed, now known to cover many thousand square miles in this part of the Atlantic. The sailors regarded this as another sign of land, and the crews were in high spirits, striving who should catch first sight of it. Some clouds in the north, and the flight of a great number of birds, were also thought to indicate that it might be found in that quarter. But Columbus, firm to his purpose, steered boldly to the west, where alone he was convinced India was to be found. New fears were, however, rising in the minds of his people. The vast tract of ocean they had passed seemed to separate them forever from Spain, while the constant, unvarying wind which favored their progress precluded all possibility of return. Columbus might have tried in vain to dispel their fears, had not new signs of land and a contrary wind added weight to his arguments. Some small birds also came singing to the ship in the morning, and flew away in the evening, which wonderfully cheered the sailors, who thought them too weak of wing to have wandered far from land. Their fears from the calm were at the same time dispelled by a heavy swell of the sea without wind, which came so opportunely that Columbus regarded it as sent by Providence to allay the murmurs of his crew. And guys, before we turn the page, let's take a look at this beautiful engraving we have here. Actually, it's entitled "Columbus Quelling the Mutiny on Board the Santa Maria." So we haven't read about that yet, but let's go ahead and take a look at this. This is kind of a nice one. These guys have expressions. It's exciting. Get a good view of that. There we go. Columbus quelling the mutiny on board the Santa Maria. So the swell without wind that arose, Columbus regarded it as sent by Providence to allay the murmurs of his crew. Every new disappointment added to their discontent. I thought I was going to sneeze. There's got to be a little dust in this book, a little 161-year-old dust. Excuse me. Every new disappointment added to their discontent, and they were already talking of compelling him to return, or if he was positive in refusing, casting him into the sea. Though conscious of his danger, Columbus remained serene and confident, soothing and encouraging some, meeting others with signal punishment. One incident will show the excitement prevailing among the crews. The lightness of the winds permitted the vessels to sail so close that the commanders could frequently converse together. On the 25th of September, Martin Pinzon affirmed that they must be near the land of Cipango, which the admiral had entered in his chart. This document, tied to a cord, was flung from one vessel to the other, and Columbus was busy examining it when Pinzon cried out, "Land, land, senor, I claim my reward," and pointed to the southwest, where indeed there was an appearance of an island. Columbus fell to his knees, thanking God, and Pinzon, joined by the crews, repeated, "Gloria in excelsis." The joy of the people could not be restrained, and the admiral was forced to sail to the southwest till the morning sun showed the land to have been only an evening cloud. Similar deceptions repeatedly took place, and the crew, fearing that they had sailed between two islands without observing them, began to utter murmurs and menaces when renewed signs of land revived their hopes. Even Pinzon, however, on the 6th of October, proposed that they should sail south, but the admiral maintained his course to the west. On the morning of the 7th, land was again announced in the west, but melted away before the evening, and Columbus, having now reached the distance where he expected land, or 750 leagues, that is 2,600 miles, consented to sail to the southwest, to which he saw all the small land birds directing their flight in the evening. They continued 3 days in this direction, the indications of their approach to land always increasing in number. On the evening of the 3rd day, the crew broke out in open defiance. But Columbus told them it was in vain to murmur, as he was determined to persevere, and next day the signs of land were so decisive that every one was eagerly on the watch. In the evening, after singing the vesper hymn and addressing the crew on the prospect of finding land that night, he took his place on the high poop of the vessel. Suddenly, about 10 o'clock, he thought he saw a light glimmering in the distance, and called a friend, pointed it out to him. They called a third person, but it had disappeared, though returning afterward at intervals. At 2 in the morning, a gun from the Pinta, which, as the quickest sailor, usually kept the lead, announced that land was in sight. A sailor, Rodrigo del Triana, claimed the reward, but it was subsequently adjudged to Columbus as having previously seen the light. Yeah. Land was now... He gets an admiralty, he gets all this 10%, and he needs the reward? What a jerk. Couldn't give poor Rodrigo anything. Oh my God. Okay, so Columbus saw the light at night. Land was now clearly seen when they shortened sail and lay to till dawn. Lay to till the dawn. Land was now clearly seen when they shortened sail and lay to till the dawn. What must have been the feelings of Columbus in these few hours when the vision had haunted him for so many years, for which he had toiled and labored, enduring poverty, reproach, and ridicule, was about to be realized, when the barrier of the ocean was to be broken down, and a new world laid open to civilized man. On the morning of Friday, 12th of October, 1492, Columbus first saw the New World, a low island densely covered with trees, among which numerous naked savages were running to and fro, as if lost in astonishment, lay before him. He cast anchor, and with the 2 Pinzons put off for shore in their boats. On landing, Columbus threw himself on his knees, kissed the earth, and returned thanks to God with tears of joy. He then took possession of the island for his sovereigns and named it San Salvador. See, that's how it's done, guys. That's what I'm telling you. Very helpful instructions. That's how you do it. Okay. Took possession of the island for his sovereigns, named it San Salvador. The crew had now passed to the opposite of extreme of exaltation, and were loud in professions of fidelity and entreaties of pardon for the past. The natives, meanwhile, watched them with trembling anxiety, but at last ventured to approach their guests, whom they fancied had come down from heaven, while their ships seemed to them monsters inspired with life. Their copper-colored and painted skins were equally new to the Spaniards, while their simplicity, gentleness, and confidence were not less pleasing. Columbus... So then why didn't you let them live? Okay. Columbus examined the island, but found no articles of commerce, and only a few ornaments of gold, which the natives seemed to intimate were procured in the south. On the evening of the 15th, he sailed south among the Bahamas, landing on several, and everywhere treating the natives with great kindness. The Spaniards were delighted with the rich vegetation and beautiful climate, and the novelty of everything they beheld, but disappointed at the scarcity of gold and other valuable metals. At last the admiral reached Cuba, whose lofty mountains and fertile plains reminded him of Sicily, though far surpassing that island in the tropical luxuriance of the vegetation and the brilliant plumages of the birds that thronged its woods. Columbus believed this island to be the Simpango of Marco Polo, or perhaps the continent of Asia, and was in constant expectation of finding gold or reaching the court of the Grand Khan. He sent messengers into the interior, but they returned without discovering gold or spices or any trace of the great monarch. They, however, noticed the potato, and soon after were astonished by observing the natives rolling up tobacco in a leaf, setting it on fire, and inhaling the smoke. Thus early were these 2 most important gifts of the New to the Old World noticed by its discoverers. Friends, let's take a quick look at this engraving, okay? So this one is called Columbus Taking Possession of the New World. All right, you see, there you go. Not only do you have the instructions, you just walk on, plant a flag. Now we've even got illustrated instructions. A little how-to illustration. This is how you conquer a world and amass untold riches and do a wee bit of genocide. This is it. Right here. There you go. Nice little. All right. Columbus taking possession of the New World. I don't know. It doesn't look. I think we need to take another wee break and continue onward.